I woke up to the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside my cabin, which was odd, because I hadn't invited anyone. My lake cabin sat 3 hours outside the city, tucked behind pines and a stretch of dirt road that most GPS apps gave up on. I looked out the window with coffee still in my hand and saw a caravan of SUVs pulling into my driveway like it was a hotel parking lot. At first I thought maybe a wedding party had lost its way. Then I saw her. Karen. Short haircut, big sunglasses, a clipboard clutched in one hand like she was Moses descending with new commandments. She stepped out of her vehicle, pointed at my porch, and started directing people to unload coolers and lawn chairs. I walked outside before the second car even finished parking. "Can I help you?" I asked, in that calm tone people usually mistake for friendliness. Karen looked me up and down like I was staff and said, "Yes, please unlock the cabin so we can start setting up. We're here for the family reunion. I booked it for the weekend." That was the moment my brain did the thing where it tries to reboot reality. Because this was my cabin. I owned it. My name was on the deed, my furniture inside, my mug of coffee currently cooling in my hand. Yet here was this woman announcing that she had booked it like it was a vacation rental. I stared at her, then at the line of relatives spilling out of cars. Kids with fishing nets, men hauling beer cases, an older aunt fanning herself with a paper plate. They looked like they had driven hours and were ready to move in. "Booked?" I asked slowly. "Through what, exactly?" Karen gave me that smug smile every HOA Karen must learn at some secret training seminar. "Through the HOA reservation system. I saw the listing online. This property is part of the community amenities, and I signed us up months ago. Check your records if you don't believe me." I nearly spit my coffee. My cabin wasn't even in the HOA's jurisdiction. I'd fought tooth and nail to keep it separate when they tried to annex the Lake Road last year. There was no reservation system, no online listing. But Karen spoke with the tone of someone who believed the world bent around her clipboard. Behind her, a cousin was already unrolling a volleyball net across my front yard. I set my coffee down on the porch rail and gave her my best deadpan. "You're standing in my yard, about to break into my house, and your evidence is an imaginary website?" Karen tilted her sunglasses down so I could see the full force of her glare. "Don't play games with me. I have the confirmation email." She snapped her fingers at a teenager, who pulled out a phone and brought up something that looked suspiciously like a Word doc converted into a PDF. The confirmation had typos, no logo, and my cabin's address scrawled in bold letters. I almost admired the effort. Almost. At that moment, her brother started hauling a gas grill out of the trunk and wheeling it toward my porch. "Hey!" I called. "That better not touch my deck." The man paused, confused. Karen barked, "Ignore him, he's just the caretaker." Clearly confused about the schedule. Caretaker. That was when my sarcasm meter finally flipped. "Right," I said. "The caretaker who also happens to live here, pay taxes here, and own every square inch of this place." "You're about to trespass, lady." Gasps rippled through the group. One aunt muttered, "Oh no, not again," like this wasn't their first Karen-related disaster. But Karen didn't flinch. She marched right up my steps until we were nose to nose. "Listen. We've been driving since 5 in the morning. My relatives are hot, hungry, and cranky. You can either cooperate or I'll call the HOA president and have you written up for obstruction." I burst out laughing, which only made her angrier. "Obstruction of what?" "My own front door." I asked. "Please. Call him. Put me on speaker." "I'll wait." Karen's nostrils flared like an angry bull. She waved her phone in the air but didn't dial. Meanwhile, her family had frozen mid-unload, watching like this was a reality show fight. Kids clutched bags of marshmallows, an uncle held a stack of inner tubes, everyone waiting for the verdict. Here's the thing about me, I don't yell. I don't threaten. I don't match crazy with crazy. I just collect receipts and play the long game. So I stepped aside, opened my cabin door, and let them all peek inside. My fishing rod's on the wall, my dog's bed in the corner, my coffee still steaming on the counter. See that? I asked. Not a rental. Not a timeshare. My house. And if any of you step 1 foot inside, I'll be on the phone with the sheriff before you can say family reunion. That should have ended it. But Karens don't back down at checkmate. They flip the board. She hissed, fine. If you want to play this way, we'll wait here until you provide alternative accommodations. You can't just leave a family stranded. That was the hook. She actually believed that her fake booking meant I owed her a cabin, or better yet, a replacement. My jaw nearly hit the deck. And that's when I knew. This weekend was about to become the pettiest, most ridiculous battle of wills this HOA had ever seen. Karen's declaration that I owed her alternative accommodations hung in the air like smoke after a firework, and her family stared at me as if waiting for me to break out a spare lakeside mansion. I leaned against the porch rail and gave her my calmest smile, the kind that usually makes people more nervous than yelling ever could. So let me get this straight, I said. You trespassed onto my property with a forged confirmation email, and now you expect me to cough up a second house because yours got lost in transit? A few of her relatives shifted uncomfortably, but Karen doubled down. She whipped out her phone like it was a weapon and started dialing. Fine. If you won't be reasonable, I'll get the HOA involved. They know exactly what's going on, and they'll back me up. You'll be fined, and this entire weekend will still belong to us. I raised my eyebrows and gestured toward the deck chair. Great. Make the call. I'll grab more coffee while you do. She gave me the smug look of someone who thinks the cavalry is about to arrive. On speaker, the line clicked, and the gravelly voice of HOA President Dennis filled the air. Dennis and I had history. He'd once tried to force me to replace my natural wood fence with the regulation white vinyl kind, and I had countered by pulling up the county property maps and proving he had no jurisdiction over my lot. He hated me ever since. Dennis, hi, it's Karen, she said, sugar dripping from her voice. We've arrived at the lake cabin we booked through the system, but there's a squatter here claiming it's his property. He refuses to vacate. There was a pause, then Dennis asked, which cabin? Karen rattled off my address with triumph in her voice. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching her family eye me like I might vanish once Dennis confirmed her fairy tale. But Dennis didn't play along. Instead, he groaned. Karen, we've been over this. That parcel is not HOA property. We don't rent it. We don't manage it. It's his land. He owns it. You can't just... Karen cut him off, her voice rising. No, you said there were lake amenities available. You told me there were listings. I made a reservation. I even have proof. Dennis actually laughed, which I hadn't heard him do since the last time I ruined one of his plans. Whatever proof you've got, it's not from us. We don't run a rental program. If you're standing on that porch, you're trespassing. The color drained from Karen's face, but her pride kept her rooted. So what do you expect me to do? Drive all these people back home? We planned this for months. Dennis sighed heavily. That's not my problem. Don't drag me into your mess. And for God's sake, don't get the HOA sued. Then he hung up. The silence that followed was delicious. Karen's family looked at her like she had just driven them into a ditch. I almost felt bad for her, except she was still standing on my porch like she owned the place. You heard the man, I said, spreading my arms wide. Not my problem. That should have been the end of it. A normal person would have admitted defeat, packed up, maybe muttered an apology. But Karen wasn't wired that way. Instead, she turned to her family and said, He's bluffing. The HOA president must be covering for him. He probably pressured them to deny the booking. This is still ours. And with that, she waved her arms, and her cousins started unloading again. I watched in disbelief as coolers hit the ground, as lawn chairs unfolded, as if my front yard were suddenly a public park. One kid ran toward the dock, fishing pole in hand, while another cousin dragged a boom box the size of a suitcase down toward the water. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. This was an occupation. I walked down the steps and stood in front of the grill guy again. "You're not setting that up here." He shifted awkwardly, clearly not thrilled to be in the middle, but Karen's voice sliced through the hesitation. "Ignore him. He doesn't make the rules." That was my breaking point. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. Karen's eyes widened, but she didn't back down. She leaned in close and hissed, "Go ahead. Call them. All they'll see is a hostile caretaker harassing a family with legitimate paperwork." "Perfect," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "I'd love for them to see your paperwork." The dispatcher answered, and within 10 minutes, a cruiser rolled down my dirt road. Sheriff's Deputy Ray stepped out, a man I'd known since high school, who had spent more summer nights on this lake than he could count. He glanced at the caravan, the half-unpacked gear, the boom box now blasting country music by the water, and then at me. "Want to tell me what's going on?" he asked. I gestured at Karen, who immediately launched into her rehearsed speech about reservations and confirmation emails. She waved her phone around until Ray took it, glanced at the screen, and then looked at me with raised eyebrows. "This is what you're dealing with?" "Apparently I run a side hustle renting out my own house without knowing it," I said dryly. Ray smirked, then turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, this isn't a valid document. This cabin is not part of the HOA, and you have no right to be here." Karen's jaw dropped. "You're taking his side without even investigating? That's favoritism. How do I know you're not friends?" Ray looked at me, then back at her. "Because we are friends. But that doesn't change the law. You're trespassing. Either pack up now or I'll start writing citations." Her family finally broke ranks. Several aunts began hauling bags back to the cars, muttering about wasted gas and wasted weekend. One uncle cursed under his breath. The teenagers sulked, dragging the volleyball net back into its bag. But Karen stood her ground, her face turning red. "This isn't fair. We planned this. We deserve this spot. I will not leave until justice is done." Ray sighed, pulling out his notepad. "Fine. Full names, IDs, and I'll let the judge explain it to you." That was the final straw. Karen shrieked, ordered her family back into their cars, and promised everyone she'd handle this legally. Tires spun gravel as the caravan retreated, leaving me on the porch with Ray, watching the dust settle. "You know she's not done," he said. I nodded. "Oh, I'm counting on it. Because if there's one thing worse than a Karen with a clipboard, it's a Karen with a grudge, and I had just become her personal nemesis. And that's when the real game began. The next morning, I was sitting on the porch sipping coffee, finally enjoying the quiet ripple of the lake, when the faint sound of hammering reached my ears. At first, I thought a neighbor was fixing a dock. But as the noise grew closer and louder, I realized it wasn't distant, it was coming from my driveway. I set my mug down, walked up the hill, and there it was. Karen and two of her nephews, wearing neon safety vests, pounding stakes into the ground like they were surveying property lines. A roll of bright orange construction tape stretched across my gravel drive, blocking the path as if my cabin had been condemned. "Good morning," I called. "Didn't expect construction crews today. Did I miss the memo?" Karen straightened, hands on hips, smugness radiating. "This area is now under review. The HOA has received multiple complaints about unauthorized occupancy and misuse of community property. I've been authorized to mark the perimeter until this can be resolved legally." I blinked. "So you forged an email, got called out by the sheriff, and now you're staging a land seizure with party decorations?" One nephew looked embarrassed, but Karen doubled down. "You're not going to bully me out of what's rightfully ours. I've filed paperwork. The HOA board will meet tomorrow. By the end of the week, this cabin will be formally under community management. Consider yourself on notice." I had to admire the audacity. Most people lick their wounds after a public defeat. Karen? She declared eminent domain on my driveway. I strolled forward, ripped the tape off the stakes, and tossed it back to her. You can mark as much imaginary territory as you want, but unless you've bribed the county registrar, this deed still has my name on it. And until a judge says otherwise, you're trespassing again. Karen smirked. Oh, don't worry. You'll hear from my lawyer. The nephews hesitated, then followed her back to their SUV. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the kind of person to threaten lawyers and then quietly fade away. Sure enough, that afternoon I got an email from a firm in town, clearly her cousin's husband's office, claiming I was withholding community resources and demanding immediate vacatur of the premises. It was laughable, but it confirmed my suspicion. She wasn't just stubborn, she was escalating. I didn't panic. I documented photos of the stakes in my driveway, screenshots of the forged email, recordings of her rant about alternative accommodations. I compiled it all neatly into a folder labeled Karen vs. Reality. By evening, I thought I'd have peace again. But just as the sun dipped behind the pines, I heard engines. Not one, not two, 5 vehicles pulling in like an invading army. Out spilled Karen's extended family, this time with tents, lanterns, and portable fire pit. You've made this hostile, she announced as if I'd invited her back. But fine. We don't need your cabin. We'll camp right here on the property line until this is settled. And there they were, pounding tent stakes into the ground not 50 feet from my porch, claiming it was community land. Kids ran wild, dogs barked, someone lit a fire pit dangerously close to dry brush. My once peaceful retreat had become a circus. I kept my calm, though my jaw ached from clenching it. You realize you're trespassing again. Karen waved a hand dismissively. Not on the cabin this time. This is bufferland. Anyone can use it. Read your bylaws. I almost laughed. There are no bylaws for my property. That night, the chaos escalated. Music blared, kids screamed, coolers cracked open. My dog barked endlessly. I sat inside with the windows shut, documenting everything. The sheriff's office could only do so much. They'd already warned her once. They told me to call back if it got violent. It didn't take long. Around midnight, one of Karen's nephews stumbled drunk toward my dock, insisting he was going to test out the boats. I intercepted him before he could untie anything. Touch that canoe and I press charges, I warned. He slurred something about public access before collapsing onto the grass. By morning, the campsite looked like a battlefield. Beer cans, half-burned logs, a cooler leaking water down the slope. Karen, however, was chipper. She marched up to my porch, clipboard in hand, and said, "We're holding the family reunion here whether you like it or not. You can be part of the solution, or you can be the reason this goes to court." I leaned against the railing, calm as ever. Court, huh? Perfect. I'll bring the photos, the forged documents, the sheriff's report, and every witness you've dragged onto my land. Can't wait to see the judge's face. Her confidence flickered, but she recovered. We'll see. My lawyer is very persuasive. I knew then that this wasn't just about a cabin anymore. This was about control, about saving face. She couldn't admit she'd been wrong in front of her family. So she would drag this out until she either won or collapsed under the weight of her own arrogance. But here's the thing she didn't know. I play long games better than anyone. And I had already started setting the next stage. I drove into town, met with the county clerk, and pulled every boundary map, deed, and survey related to my property. I highlighted every inch of land that belonged to me and had it notarized. I even got the sheriff's deputy to sign a statement confirming the trespassing incident. Then, I filed a restraining order request. By the time I got back, Karen's family had expanded their campsite, complete with a volleyball court and makeshift buffet table. It looked like a carnival. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. I let them enjoy their illusion of victory, documenting every violation along the way. Because I knew something Karen clearly didn't. The county judge handling restraining orders had a zero-tolerance policy for property disputes turning into circus acts. So when I walked back up to my porch, coffee in hand, and saw Karen directing her family like a general commanding troops, I just smiled. "Have fun while it lasts," I muttered. "Because the hammer's about to drop." And deep down, I think she knew it too. Thursday night, the HOA clubhouse looked like a courtroom without the dignity. Folding chairs lined up in rows, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a podium at the front where the board sat like bored monarchs waiting to be entertained. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. I walked in carrying a slim black binder. Karen was already there, naturally, stationed at the front row with her clipboard like it was a sword. She'd brought reinforcements too, her husband, 2 nephews, and the same aunt who'd muttered, "Not again," during the cabin fiasco. She whispered furiously to each of them, like a general prepping her troops. The rest of the community trickled in, some curious, some annoyed. People love free drama, and this was better than Netflix. By the time the meeting started, the place was standing room only. The president, Dennis, cleared his throat. "This special hearing is called to address a dispute brought forth by Mrs. Karen Holbrook against the property owner of the lake cabin." "That would be me," I said cheerfully, raising my hand like I was answering roll call. Karen stood before Dennis could continue. "Before this man starts spinning lies, I need to clarify. This is not a personal vendetta. This is about fairness, community access, and misuse of our shared resources. My family was denied rightful enjoyment of the lakefront. We were harassed, threatened, and intimidated." She paused dramatically, scanning the room to gauge her audience. A few neighbors nodded, others rolled their eyes. Dennis sighed. "You'll have your time, Karen. But let's allow both sides to present." I rose slowly, carrying my binder to the front. "Thank you. I'll keep this simple." I opened the binder and pulled out the first page, a color printout of the infamous confirmation email. I held it up for the room. Exhibit A. The alleged proof that Karen used to claim she booked my cabin through the HOA. Note the typos. Note the lack of letterhead. Note that it was apparently issued by someone named admin person. Laughter rippled through the audience. Karen's cheeks flushed red. Exhibit B, I continued, flipping to a photo. Karen arriving with her family caravan and attempting to move in. Taken before the sheriff was called. Notice the clipboards, the coolers, the volleyball net. Very official. A neighbor in the back chuckled. Exhibit C, I said, pulling out a video still. Karen supervising her nephew with a chainsaw, cutting down trees on my property. Chainsaws, by the way, are not recognized tools for community improvement projects. This time, outright laughter broke out. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, she really did that?" Karen shot to her feet. "Those photos are taken out of context. He's manipulating." Dennis held up a hand. "You'll have a chance to rebut, Mrs. Holbrook." I flipped to the next section. Exhibit D, Sheriff's Report, signed by Deputy Ray. It clearly states that Karen and her family were trespassing, that they were warned, and that she refused to comply until threatened with citations. I laid the document on the table. Dennis scanned it, eyebrows lifting. "And finally," I said, holding up the piece de resistance, "the petition with crayon signatures. Exhibit E, Karen's attempt at legal authority, featuring signatures from minors and at least one doodle of a dinosaur. Very compelling." The room erupted. People were laughing so hard the board had to pound the table for order. Karen's face turned the color of a stop sign. "This is character assassination," she screeched. "You're all laughing at a mother trying to fight for her family's rights." Dennis rubbed his temples. "Karen, none of this establishes any legal claim over his property. The sheriff has already confirmed it's private land." Karen tried a new tactic. "Then fine. Maybe it's not legally ours, but morally, he owes us. That cabin sits on land our HOA could use. Why should one man hog the best access point when dozens of families live nearby?" Murmurs spread. Some people actually looked thoughtful. That was her real strategy. If she couldn't win legally, she'd win socially by guilt-tripping the crowd. I let the silence hang a moment, then leaned forward. Morally, huh? Then let me ask the room. How many of you have ever seen Karen fine someone for leaving trash cans out too long? Or threaten a lien over Christmas lights? Or report a parked car because it was 3 inches too far into the street? Hands went up. Laughter turned to groans of recognition. Heads nodded. Suddenly, the tide shifted. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about years of pent-up resentment toward Karen. She fined me for planting roses instead of tulips, one woman called out. She tried to stop my son from selling lemonade, another neighbor added. Dennis banged his gavel, but it was too late. The room had turned into an anti-Karen confessional. Karen tried to shout over them. This is irrelevant. This is slander. But the crowd was no longer listening to her. They were venting, purging years of frustration. I stood quietly, letting it unfold, sipping from my water bottle like I was watching a bonfire I hadn't started but didn't mind warming my hands at. Finally, Dennis slammed the gavel hard enough to make everyone flinch. Enough. This is out of control. He looked at me. Do you have anything else? Just one thing, I said, pulling out a final document. A notarized survey of my land, signed by the county clerk, showing the exact boundaries. Every inch of shoreline, every tree, every rock, it's all mine. End of discussion. I placed it on the table with a satisfying slap. Dennis studied it, then nodded. This is clear. The board has no jurisdiction over his property. This hearing is closed. Karen screamed. Not metaphorically, she actually screamed, a raw, furious sound that echoed off the clubhouse walls. You're all conspiring against me. You'll regret this. He doesn't deserve that land. He doesn't deserve any of this. Her husband tugged at her arm, embarrassed, but she wrenched free and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the exit sign rattled. The room fell into stunned silence. Then, as if on cue, someone started clapping. It spread until the whole room was applauding. Not for me necessarily, but for the rare victory of watching Karen finally, publicly, get shut down. I just smiled and gathered my binder. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you at the next barbecue. My cabin, by the way, is not open for reservations. That got another laugh as I walked out. But here's the thing about Karens. They don't go quietly. They lick their wounds, regroup, and come back with new tricks. And as much as I enjoyed the victory, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see her. Because people like Karen don't just want control. They need it. And she wasn't going to let a little thing like facts or legal boundaries stop her. I drove home under the stars, binder on the seat beside me, wondering what her next move would be. I didn't have to wait long to find out. For the next few days the lake was quiet. Almost too quiet. No SUVs rumbling down the gravel, no clipboard-wielding shadows creeping around the driveway, no late-night karaoke echoing across the water. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt like a soldier on leave, waiting for the next shell to drop. It came on Saturday morning. I was frying eggs when I heard a buzzing overhead, low, insistent, mechanical. At first I thought it was a mosquito the size of a small bird. Then the shadow passed across the kitchen window. I stepped onto the porch, spatula still in hand, and looked up. A drone. A big one, with 4 propellers whining like angry bees. It hovered over my yard, dipping and weaving, its little camera eye staring straight down at me. And who was standing at the end of the driveway, remote controller in hand? Karen. She had on oversized sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and the look of someone who had just discovered a new superpower. "Good morning," she shouted over the drone's buzz. "Just conducting an aerial survey. HOA authorized. We need visual confirmation of property boundaries." I stood there with the spatula, dumbfounded. "You're flying a spy drone over my house?" "Not spying," she shouted. "Documenting. Transparency is important." The drone swooped lower, circling dangerously close to the porch. My dog barked and snapped at it. I swatted at it with the spatula like it was an oversized horsefly. This is harassment, I called. This is accountability, she retorted. The community has a right to know how you're misusing shared assets. I laughed so hard I almost dropped the spatula. Shared assets? Lady, this is my breakfast. The drone dipped again, and I did the only logical thing. I grabbed the garden hose. One well-aimed blast, and the drone sputtered, sparked, and dropped like a wounded bird onto the lawn. My dog pounced on it, tail wagging, as Karen shrieked in horror. "You'll pay for that," she screamed. "That was HOA equipment." "Pretty sure it was a Christmas present from Best Buy," I said, turning off the hose. She stomped off, muttering about evidence and lawsuits. By noon, I had 3 emails in my inbox. One from her lawyer, cousin demanding I replace the drone, one from the HOA board apologizing for any inconvenience, and one from a neighbor sending me a blurry photo of Karen at the local electronics store buying another drone. It was clear. She wasn't going to quit. And sure enough, Sunday evening, she returned. This time not with a drone, but with a party. 6 cars rolled up. Out poured her family again, this time dressed in matching t-shirts that read Holbrook Family Reunion 2025. They carried folding tables, speakers, trays of food. Within minutes, they had set up a full-blown picnic on the strip of land just outside my fence, music blaring, laughter echoing. Karen approached the fence, sipping from a red Solo cup. "See? Perfect compromise. We're not on your porch, not in your cabin. We're adjacent. You can't touch us." I looked at the crowd spilling onto my grass. Kids tossing frisbees onto my dock. An uncle setting up a propane fryer a little too close to the pines. A karaoke machine testing its microphone with ear-splitting feedback. "You call this a compromise?" I asked. She raised her cup in a toast. "Welcome to the neighborhood." That was it. The long game had reached its final move. I went inside, grabbed my binder, and dialed a number I'd been saving for just this moment. Not the sheriff. Not the HOA. Higher. The county zoning office. When the inspector arrived the next morning, Karen was still cleaning up her adjacent reunion. He stepped out of his truck, clipboard in hand, and started surveying the mess. "Mrs. Holbrook?" he asked, scanning his notes. Karen froze. "Yes. We received a complaint of unpermitted event activity on land adjacent to the lake cabin. That includes noise violations, open flames in restricted zones, and improper waste disposal." He pointed to the trash bags piled against my fence, raccoons already picking at them. Karen stammered. That wasn't an event. That was a private gathering." The inspector shook his head. "Private gatherings don't use amplification equipment without a permit. They don't serve food from propane fryers without inspection. And they don't block road access with 6 vehicles. You're in violation of county code on multiple counts." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I leaned casually on the fence. "Don't forget the drone surveillance. Pretty sure there are FAA regulations about that." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Drone surveillance?" Karen's sunglasses slipped down her nose. "That's irrelevant." He scribbled furiously on his clipboard. "Not irrelevant. Illegal. We'll add that to the report." By the time he was done, Karen was facing fines that made HOA penalties look like parking tickets. Thousands of dollars due immediately. Her relatives were already climbing into their cars, muttering darkly about never again. When the inspector left, Karen turned to me, eyes blazing. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this is over?" I smiled. "Karen, this was over the second you tried to cut down my tree. Everything since then has just been encores." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this." But her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw it, the realization sinking in. The unstoppable force had finally met an immovable wall. By the following week, her driveway was quieter than mine. No clipboards, no SUVs, no neon vests. I heard whispers that her husband had finally put his foot down, sick of paying fines and replacing drones. Someone said she'd even lost her seat on the HOA board after the special hearing fiasco. As for me, I got my peace back. The lake was mine again, still and glassy in the mornings, alive with loons at dusk. My cabin stood solid, a fortress against the absurdity of entitlement. Every now and then, I catch Karen driving past slowly, her sunglasses hiding whatever storm is brewing behind them. But she doesn't stop. She doesn't speak. She just keeps driving. And I sit on the porch, coffee in hand, dog at my feet, binder of evidence tucked safely inside. Just in case. Because if I've learned anything, it's that Karens never really disappear. They just regroup. But that's fine. Because I'll always be ready for the next round. After all, long games are my specialty.